My name is Jason.
My name is Tom.
And this is Fear of a Black Dragon, an old school RPG podcast.
And in this episode, we've never been so lively and quick. It's the 2020 Christmas special.
Listeners, this is the very merry Black Dragon Christmas special 2020. Hopefully the first in many to come, which, depending on how you view that statement, is either a promise or a threat. Here's what we're going to do, listeners. We are going to ditch our normal format in favor of this holiday special. And in this holiday special, we are going to first do a couple of capsule reviews for some Christmas-themed adventure modules. Then we're going to talk about giving the gift of gaming, i.e., enticing your non-gamer friends into tabletop role-playing games, which is something you might be doing over the holidays. From there, we're going to talk about 2021 gaming resolutions, and then we're going to wrap up with some maybe slightly offbeat Christmas-related companion adventures. So, with all that said, Tom, you and I each chose a Christmas-themed module to at least read through, not necessarily play. What did you choose?
Right, so I chose Unholy Land by Casey Garsky, which is, and I quote from the cover, an ahistorical Hexmas crawl for mid-level characters. I have not run this yet. In fact, I will start running it tomorrow. The recording schedule has not been my friend in this case, but never mind. So I have been reading it fairly closely, at least. I can give you that. As it says or suggests, it's a hex crawl set in Palestine during the Nativity, but with weird stuff. It's got a, I'm going to say 12 by 10 hex map, 6 miles hexes as its sort of mainstay, and it's got, intro bits about the mysterious star that's transiting the sky, telling you how you should start, and then from then on it's pretty much all random encounter tables in an OSR classic way. People, animals, including ibexes and camels, antediluvians. Okay, so this is the thing, this is where it gets weird, is the idea that there are monsters around, but also things from the ancient world have come back. So there are dinosaurs and big leviathans in the sea, if you get in the sea. There's some of the undead. There are demons knocking around, including some, in a very good New Testament nod, 2d4 wild boars that an exorcist has banished some evil spirits into.
Nice.
And there's giants and cockatrices. And by the way, all these random encounters are d6 tables, which I think gives you an indication of how quickly you're supposed to burn through this material. There is a what's happening in the village table for when you show up there, Jerusalem encounters, and then 2 rumour categories, which I like. There are weird happenings, such as, do you have children? King Herod's secret police are searching for a particular boy. I don't know why, it can't be good. And then prophecies, which are mostly just, whatever. There are hex keys, but not every hex has a thing in it. But, for example, there is an undead horde that has sort of semi-accidentally been summoned by King Herod's necromancers, making its way, led by King Ramesses II, and illustrated by a photo of his mummy up from the southwest.
Good.
There are some fishmen being worshipped by the Dagon cultists of Joppa. There are some shepherds who, if you find them at night, are being told about the birth of Christ by the angels. Hex 6-9, the 3 magi. This I like. Melchior is actually a mage. Caspar is a skilled thief and assassin. And Balthazar is a master swordsman. These 3 have adventured together for years. It's all like that. There's Roman soldiers on their way to deal with zealots at Masada. And then you get your bestiary and treasure tables and stuff. And then that's it. It's sort of illustrated with public domain art of the Nativity from, I'm going to say it's mostly 19th century paintings and engravings from books. And I don't know, I feel like it's really got something to it. And I think what really appeals to me about it is I feel like it's using an ahistorical adventure to better recreate the feeling of what the history would be. Let me explain that.
Yeah, please do.
When we sort of think about, if you were to set an adventure in Palestine anytime in the 1st century AD, we know that was a time of absolute terror, like crucifixions, uprisings, repression, things being destroyed, the Romans generally being complete tools. But it's hard for us in the modern day to understand how that would have felt, right? Because we know what's going to happen. We know that how the siege of Masada is going to turn out. So even if you're allied, say, with the losing side of that siege, the certainty takes away from your feeling of, I don't know what's going to happen.
Right, yeah.
Once you've got plesiosaurs knocking around off the coast, all bets are off, you know? And it makes me think of, like, if you think about the two famous films of Romeo and Juliet, there's the Franco Zeffirelli one from the 60s that looks like what the quote-unquote historical Romeo and Juliet would have been like. It's all these kind of 15th century costumes. It's shot in Italy, in Verona, I think. And then you got the Baz Luhrmann one from the 90s, which is completely ahistorical, but gets across much better this idea of the feuding families and so on,
right,
in a much more immediate way. I think that's kind of what he's done there. Yeah, I think it's really cool. I think actually in a similar way, through game mechanics, in the modern era, in developed societies, I think it's hard to understand the kind of the import of the, you know, the Christmas message of the idea of God being incarnated in a baby. Babies are not as fragile as they used to be, right? Whereas, so I don't think there's any better way to get that across to D&D players than by saying Jesus has 1 hit point. so yeah, I think it's a really inventive work. And actually, I have a bit of a bone to pick with the author, Casey, about his revision to this. When I downloaded it again to prepare for playing, right, there was some stuff in it I didn't remember, like a Merkava tank from modern-day Israel that somehow travelled back in time, and a weird bit with Avatar of God travelling back from the year 5 trillion. And I was like, I don't remember this stuff. And I went and downloaded the older PDF, and he'd added these more gonzo bits in what's called the temporal distortion table. And I think he did it just to kind of soften the blow, maybe, make it a bit less scary and intense. So personally, I will not be using that page.
Okay,
I think I understand why it's there. But yeah, not for me. I'm all up for the blood and guts terror of demons in the night and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to playing this, basically.
You mentioned it's a hex crawl, and so I suppose the answer is probably no. Is there anything that the characters are like doing? Is there like a mission, or is there something that gets them started, or is it kind of just like, okay, now you're in this hex, now you're in this hex?
Yeah, no, there's not that. There's plenty of quest givers knocking around, or people doling out prophecies. Like someone in a Mithras temple in one city sort of somehow knows about the undead, who are actually, that's the thing, if nothing else happens, the undead army will gradually make its way across the, the land. And then, yeah, there's sort of different options, but yeah, it's very hands-off in that regard. Personally, I'm going to be playing it as part of my playtest for my current project, Revolution Comes to the Kingdom, which features these sort of hallucinatory, quote-unquote, dungeon segments. So for those player characters, it will not necessarily really be time travel, which I think is another way to kind of smooth over. Some people might have a bit of a problem with the dinosaurs in the Holy Land bit. So if you just sort of go, well, it might not really be happening, it might be a metaphor, then that might be useful.
I love it. This is a diversion, but did you ever see that Noah's Ark movie with...
Oh, with Russell Crowe? No, I didn't. I heard it was awful.
It's not awful. It is an unfairly maligned movie, because I think the reason why people think it's awful is because it is such a starkly different vision of what we're typically given in like Bible media. I think we all have from Sunday school, we all have this vision of like what Bible times were like, or we have some sort of cartoon representation of it. But what Noah does, which is so interesting to me, is it presents a world that feels truly kind of ancient and alien, like just totally unrecognizable from our own world as it would have been. You know, it's not a perfect movie, but I think it's pretty fascinating to watch. And I'm reminded a little bit, as you're talking about this module, something about the alienness of it almost makes it more believable and more approachable, because it feels like a living, breathing world as opposed to just words we're used to reading on the page.
Yeah, because it becomes too familiar. It becomes comfortable.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it sort of shatters that sort of comfort zone that you have with the story. And so I really enjoyed it. Maybe I should have saved that for companion adventures.
Yeah, we're not really doing adventure-specific companion adventures this episode, though, so it's okay.
Right, yeah. There's one for you, listeners. So.
Which reminds me, like the Jesus Christ Superstar movie is also, I think, banging this. Like the landscape, of course, it was shot in Israel. And I think the Merkava tank is a nod to the bit where Judas sees a tank coming over a sand dune. I can't remember why he sees that in the film, but he does.
Awesome. Well, the holiday-themed module that I chose is a little more secular in nature. I chose the 2020 Dungeon Crawl Classics holiday module. They do one every year, apparently, called The Doom That Came to Christmas Town. It was written by Marzio Muscadere or Muscadere. Not sure how you pronounce surname, with art and such by all the usual Dungeon Crawl Classics suspects. This module is basically a mashup of How the Grinch Stole Christmas and the Rankin Bass holiday claymation specials. Basically, the Yule light is dying. It's this sort of gemstone thing on the top of a big Christmas tree in the middle of Christmas Town. It's dying, and because of that, Lord Claus is sick. And basically, if the Yule light goes out, then evil is going to spread throughout the land. And all of this, you're told up front, is the work of the Grinch, and your characters have been tasked with going to take care of it. Along the way, you're going to encounter many familiar characters from the aforementioned movies, such as the dentist elf from the claymation films. I can't remember his name, Hermie or Ermie, something like that. In any case, here he's presented as a dental mancer, and there's a whole separate section of like dental mancy spells, which is kind of fun and totally gross if you're the kind of person like our friend Lowell Francis.
I was about to say, yeah, it's gonna...
sort of triggered by teeth things. Yeah, you do not read these spells. They are horrifying. There's a dwarf called Yukon of Cornelius and so forth. You get all these like characters who are obviously from the movies. You'll also explore environments from those movies that are sort of reimagined as dungeon crawls, such as the Isle of Misfit Toys and things like that. In the end, you face off against the Grinch, who you can just kill, or you can defeat his evil phylactery by doing acts of kindness. So 3 acts of kindness will defeat the Grinch in that way. I actually did manage to sneak in a play of this yesterday, and so it worked pretty well as a one-shot. I had to cut a couple of encounters to make it all fit into a 4-hour time period, but we managed to get most of it done. Overall, I think there's a lot to like here. The pleasure of this module is that most likely your players are going to recognize all the references because they're very forward as far as that goes. None of them are subtle or hidden. You're going to recognize all the references. You're going to have fun, like especially if you know the claymation movies. You are going to have fun like every time a new recognizable character appears in this sort of dungeon adventure form or whatever. So there's a lot of fun there. It has a couple of fun mini games. There's this like iceberg hopscotch mini game, which is basically Minesweeper, which is kind of fun. It's a fun little one-off kind of thing. I have to say, the references in this module are really on the nose. So there is a version of this, I think, that I would have preferred more, where the allusions to like the Grinch and Whoville and the Rankin Bass movies were maybe a little more subtle or a little more like winking and nodding. Here, they're quite on the nose. If you look up the picture of the Grinch, it's literally the picture of the Grinch from like drawn in the Dr. Seuss style.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds like an intellectual property nightmare. I'm
amazed they got away with it, frankly. We're assuming they got away with it. I don't know. Yeah. Apologies to Goodman Games if some IP lawyer representing the Dr. Seuss family,
estate, I guess.
Yeah, is listening to this. It's a little on the nose. Everything is so obvious, but I kind of forgive it because I feel like this is the sort of thing that you're going to be doing as a one-off, although it does give you advice for how to incorporate it into your ongoing campaign.
Your ongoing, very serious fantasy campaign.
Yeah, sounds totally insane to me, but assuming that you're going to be doing this as a one-off, I think it's okay for it to be a little on the nose because, you're kind of there just to have that experience, right? You're there just to kind of like, oh yeah, the pre-gen characters are like Cindy Lou Who, you get to play Fireball, who is like a reindeer son of Comet, right? Just stuff like that. It was a laugh. It was not a bad little dungeon crawl, to be fair. It's got some good little environments and stuff and encounters. So yeah, I enjoyed it.
All right.
And so with that, let's go to the next segment. Okay, listeners, in this segment, we are going to talk about giving the gift of tabletop role-playing games. It's the holidays, and we're recording this during the COVID era, so we're going to set that aside, though, because Fear of a Black Dragon is evergreen. You might be listening to this 3 years from now. There is a chance that you may have an opportunity to introduce tabletop role-playing games to your non-gaming family and friends. In a sort of nod to our normal Expert Delve section, Tom and I wanted to talk about how to approach that, how to make it successful, and maybe convert some of these people to be lifelong gamers. Maybe that's too ambitious, I don't know. But I like the idea of it, at least. at the start, I want to say that this is not as hard as you think. I think that the socially awkward gamer nerd children in us, or at least in me, I won't speak for Tom, but for me, I think we're conditioned to believe on some level that role-playing games are not the sort of thing that, quote, normal people do. Well, first of all, Tom, what about that premise?
I think that's fair. In the sense, at least, that it's a niche hobby. I think everyone's aware of that. Although, yeah, maybe overly so. Like, I imagine that, say, motocross enthusiasts don't agonize all the time about how nobody really understands motocross. Like, they just get on with it. So,
yeah, exactly. I think gamers are a little bit more hesitant when it comes to this kind of thing. I know I am. For a long time, I was, at least. I will say, though, in my experience, it's not as bad as you think, listeners. I personally have always had good luck introducing tabletop role-playing games to people who have never played them. In recent years, it's been a little easier, I think, because of certain pop culture phenomenons like Stranger Things. I think that there have been some things like that that have sort of made tabletop role-playing games a little bit more like broadly accessible, or at least like more interesting to people who might not otherwise be into them. Some other examples, the massive, increasingly mainstream popularity of Critical Role, the Adventure Zone podcast, things like that. Something that I have discovered when I sneak up to the topic of tabletop role-playing games with people who I know are not gamers is a lot of them actually want to talk about it. They have questions.
Yeah.
They might even be interested in the idea of it because of some of those things I just mentioned, like Stranger Things. They just never expressed that out loud to you.
Yeah.
So that's the key, right? Like, just because they haven't told you their interest doesn't mean, it's not there. And so it's not as hard as you think. You just have to be sort of strategic about it. And you have to give a lot of thought to the tastes and interests and maybe most importantly, attention spans of the people you're trying to give the gift of gaming to. But it can be done. Have I pushed the boat too far out here, Tom?
No, I think you're okay. I think we probably need to clarify some premises here, though. Am I correct in thinking that the scenario you're imagining here as the baseline is that you have got a friend or family member, well, let's hope a table of, say, 3, who have expressed some interest, and you're going to suggest to them, hey guys, why don't we play something this Christmas, in person or online? Like, you're going to be the GM or you're going to be the facilitator? Is that about right?
I think that's right.
Yeah, okay.
I've just sprung it on people too.
Yeah, okay.
Without
like, hey guys, I brought rifts. No,
But like, my friends and family kind of know that's my thing. Yeah. So it's a sort of built-in like expectation with me.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe it's a group that you have you've primed them a little bit.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I think at the start, there is a certain balance that you have to strike between a crunchy system and a rules light system. This sounds like the most obvious thing in the world, but it's actually something you should pay really close attention to. I've got 2 games as my sort of polar opposite games here. Pathfinder and Fiasco. Pathfinder, I don't think I probably have to tell you what that is if you're listening to this. It's the other big fantasy role-playing game apart from D&D. And Fiasco, of course, is the rules-light madcap crime story game by Jason Morningstar. In my opinion, they're like on the opposite ends of the sort of crunchiness spectrum. Okay.
Yeah. And they're both terrible choices for first game.
They're both horrible options for like a player's first game, like first introduction to the hobby. Both are terrible options. Never play either of them for this proposition. The reason Pathfinder, obviously, it's just too crunchy for most people. And I'll tell you, it's an instant turnoff. And I haven't done this in recent years, but I know from like decades past trying to introduce games. Back then, I didn't have a concept of crunchy or non-crunchy, to be honest. It was just role-playing games. But trying to introduce like crunchy games to non-gamers is such a struggle, and it's a huge turnoff. And honestly, it makes people never want to try them again. And that's sad. In more recent years, I introduced the Burning Wheel to my non-gamer best friend. I was just getting back into role-playing games, and to me, the Burning Wheel wasn't as crunchy as what I was accustomed to prior to getting back into RPGs. And so I thought, oh, this is pretty accessible. It's not.
No.
It was a horrible experience. To this day, and this was like 7 years ago, I cannot convince Jonathan, my friend, to try a role-playing game. Like no matter how much I tell him, like, no, they're better, I've found better ones, you're going to love it. Like, no, that Burning Wheel experience 100% soured him on the proposition. So you have to be a little careful with the crunch level. And in particular, super crunchy games are hard. On the other end of the spectrum, I think Fiasco is too light. Fiasco in particular and games like it have a really bad, what I call a getting started problem. You set up the game, but then like it's not always obvious like how to get going. And new gamers especially have a hard time with that.
That's right. I think there is a new version that I have not played.
I haven't tried it either.
Allegedly does solve a bit of that trouble, but I've definitely had the experience of being in what you might call a mixed level of kind of, I think it was 5 of us, 3 people who've been role-playing for years, and a couple of relative newcomers who just played a few things. The weird thing though with Fiasco is it has all the setup is really board gamey and fun, right? Everyone loves that bit.
Yeah.
And then it's, okay, let's have a dramatic conversation. You start.
Now let's play.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
We really had to kind of help out. And not just the newcomer players, like even the experienced ones had to kind of, you have to step back a lot and think and help each other. And yeah, it would be awful for... well, no, that's the thing though. There are exceptions, right? There are people who might like Pathfinder as their first game if they're hard, crunchy, cardboard tile wargamers who...
Like wargamers or board gamers might like it, yeah.
And amateur dramatics enthusiasts might love Fiasco.
Improv artists will love Fiasco, right?
But unless that's your audience, don't do that.
Yeah, I think here I'm talking about like your average... your average like mom and dad. I just imagine my parents, right? Those are my like baselines.
That should be your benchmark, I think, yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah, Fiasco is just too light. It has a getting started problem, which is really tough. I think it's probably great, like we said, in the hands of like somebody who's into dramatics or like improv, but it's so improv heavy that it's just a challenge for like new gamers. I think what you have to do is you have to find something that's definitely in the middle of that. I don't think precisely in the middle is the right answer, but just somewhere between those two poles based off kind of your group. In my experience, most people are natural storytellers. I think that's part of being human. To me, the perfect new gamer TTRPG is one that encourages that natural inclination to be a storyteller, but then kind of gets out of the way. I think some of the lighter OSR entries are probably good for this, especially in recent years. There have been some really good light OSR systems. I think story games with a more party game feel are great. The Final Girl, Choose Your Own Adventure. Maybe The Extraordinary Adventures of Baron Munchausen.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it has the Fiasco problem a bit. I mean, I've played it a lot, but it's sort of designed for the kind of person who has a podcast about gaming.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. People always tell me like, "Oh yeah, I used Munchausen, it was great," and I'm always like, I'm a little skeptical of it too. I can kind of see it with the right group, but I personally find Baron Munchausen a really hard game because you have to be funny, and I'm not good at being intentionally funny. Like I think I can be funny, but not like try to be funny. Like that's hard for me.
Yeah.
But in any case, some sort of like party game-ish sort of story games are a great fit. I've actually had really good luck with Powered by the Apocalypse games and new players. I don't know if that's because I am just really steeped in that and I know that system well and I'm good at it. And so I'm able to make it a fun experience no matter what. But setting aside that possibility, I think that PBTA games just do a really good job of signaling what the players are supposed to be doing. The character sheets are usually pretty simple. The moves that are written down kind of say, when you do this, right? When you do this, this thing happens. So there's a lot of like good signposting for like how to actually play right there on the character sheet. And also, I think because PBTA games focus on genre, I think that's also sometimes easier for new players.
I think that's the key thing is having a genre so you can understand, how am I supposed to act now? Oh, I'm in a pirate game, I should say aha and swing on something, or this is a detective game, I should ponder a mystery. That's the real strength of PBTA. And I think you're right to mention the lighter OSR games. And weirdly, I think the reason they're good is the opposite of why PBTA is good for an intro, which is that they're not that intuitive. Which I think for a lot of people coming into an RPG, if you give them something where everything is too kind of easy, where you just sort of like, add 2 dice if you're using this skill and then blah, blah, blah. It feels like there's no game there. Whereas if when someone says, let's play a game that's around a table, you're thinking about board games, you're therefore thinking about rules and restrictions. You're expecting to have to grapple with something, right? Some mechanic to hook into. And so I think the fact that OSR games are a little bit weird, but not too weird is actually a good thing.
Yeah.
And probably in PBTA as well. Like there's still stuff there's the clocks to colour in, and you've got to pick your eyes from a list. That's weird, isn't it? But it's pretty cool. Yeah. So all those little things. I think if it's something that's too light in the sense of, like a fudge derivative, I think is not great, because it puts too much on. Yeah, it's not just story games that do this. It's anything that really is too freewheeling, doesn't give enough guidance for players to know what they should be kind of doing in the next 10 minutes, basically.
You mentioned real briefly pick lists on Powered by the Apocalypse games.
Yeah.
That's a surprisingly effective tool for roping in new players when you have to pick your name, pick your eyes, what do they look like, pick your clothing, those sorts of things. Just the process of doing that helps build up an idea of the character in your mind. That's pretty great, right? It's a good way of, right there on the paper, fleshing out what your character is going to be and getting something in the player's mind so they have somewhere to start, as far as that goes. Those are great thoughts. I think the most important thing here, though, in this discussion is you really have to consider the table that you're going to have. With new gamers especially, I think you have to be really, really mindful of who are these people, who are these players, what are their tolerances. If your mother and father are not the most conversant with nerd stuff, jumping right into elf games may not be the best move, right? Because they may not have all the fantasy foundation to do that. But they may like something that is, my own game, Brindlewood Bay, has lots of mainstream TV and literary touchstones. That might be something they know. Or there are games that revolve around real world history that might be a good fit. One of my most successful instances of introducing role-playing games to a new player was with Night Witches. Night Witches is a game about Soviet airwomen in World War II. And it was a hit because this person I knew was a World War II history buff. That fact got them really engaged and hooked into what was going on. I will say, though, consider whether your parents maybe are more secretly into fantasy stuff than you realize, or are more conversant in it than you realize. Something I've discovered in recent years is that my parents know fantasy stuff a lot better than I thought they did.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, Lord of the Rings came out in the 40s, so it's not that surprising. Yeah.
For most of my life, I have dismissed the idea that they would know anything about such things, but they're actually surprisingly conversant. And this came up because this was a few years ago, but we were watching, this was when The Witcher was a TV show on Netflix when it first came out. They were really into The Witcher, and I was kind of watching a couple episodes with them. I remember saying, you guys know this is just D&D, right? This is what D&D is, right? It's just this. Because they know I'm growing up, I was so focused on Dungeons and Dragons. We kind of got talking, and I was like, wow, they actually really know the fantasy tropes better than I thought they did. Not even just from watching the show, just in general. So
in general, yeah.
It was an eye-opening moment.
One thing that occurs to me, though, is if you have someone who is a fan of a specific thing. So, for example, I think the reason Night Witches is good for World War II buffs is because it's about a surprising and cool fact that people know about it, right? Oh, about the Night Witches. The response is either, I hadn't heard of that, but I like World War II, that's interesting, or I have heard of that, and so is the designer, that's cool. What I think is dangerous, though, is if someone is, for example, really nerdily into Star Trek, don't run a Star Trek game for them. Or a couple of years back, I bought for my godson the Doctor Who role-playing game, not because I think it's a particularly good game, haven't played it, read the 6 out of 10 reviews, but because I know that he likes Doctor Who a lot, so it was like a dual-use gift, right? Either he'll start playing it and become a role player, or he'll just have a cool hardback book about Doctor Who with pictures in it, right?
Right.
But yeah. I would not have attempted to GM that game for him because I don't know. Actually, I probably have absorbed huge amounts of background radiation Doctor Who throughout my childhood, but obviously our perceptions of that universe would be different. I would undoubtedly annoy him somehow through my portrayal of a freaking Cyberman. So, just that I think is dangerous ground. So you should choose something that's, for example, if you have a Star Wars fan play Scum and Villainy, don't necessarily play Star Wars with them. You want adjacent, but not the same.
Side note, my roommate, who does not listen to this, so I'm not worried about saying it, totally swell guy, super into Star Wars, but into Star Wars in a way that that I'm a little alienated by. Like, he knows it really, really well, and I don't, you know? And so when we're watching The Mandalorian, great big things are happening that have no meaning to me. They're totally like life-affirmingly important to him. It is what it is. It's just what he's into, and there's nothing wrong with that. A couple years ago, Fantasy Flight reissued the old West End Star Wars role-playing game. They did like a 30th anniversary reissue. I managed to get a copy of that, and I got him that for Christmas, and it's from 1987.
I've got it in my next door in my bookshelf. Yeah.
I don't know if he's going to like try to run that for us or what. I have no idea, but I do love the idea that the West End Star Wars game is sort of a touchstone for lots of the Star Wars lore that came after it, because when it came out, there just wasn't much at that time, you know, so it was kind of influential. But I kind of was on the same page with you in the Doctor Who thing. It was like, here's a role-playing game thing, which I like to talk about. I like to talk about role-playing games. And it's a Star Wars thing, which you love to talk about. And so we're kind of meeting in the middle with this Christmas gift.
Yeah, exactly.
It should be fun. No, it's great. I'm learning a lot about Star Wars, though, so that's good. Okay. Getting back to this idea of know your audience, I think if the table is younger kids, this is probably a really important consideration to keep in mind. What's your thought on gaming with kids? I know you've kind of started to do that a little bit, Tom.
I have with my son. I think it's fine. I mean, if you don't normally hang around, like if it's not your kids, if it's just like nieces and nephews that you see rarely, this might be a bit more challenging than you think. FYI, so maybe, take a step back and let someone else do it. But yeah, honestly, I don't think you need to worry too much about it. Children are much better at learning mechanisms and things than adults are. Mm-hmm. So I would pick something with roughly the same game weight or crunchiness. And I would also say that I think it's interesting that younger gamers, I mean, I guess like technically 15 and 16, they are children, but they're also, it's not the same as playing with a 6-year-old. But they have their own awareness of the sort of boundaries and parameters. You don't need to necessarily be constantly checking yourself about whether an adventure is okay. I mean, you'll know when something is inappropriate for kids.
Yeah.
But I often find when playing with my son that he doesn't even consider the murder hobo approach that the adventure might have assumed, right, that you would be expecting to deal with adult players. He'll just say hello to the big giant, or attempt to grow a big plant to climb up the side of the castle. Like, he's still in that magical realist world, which is great. Let them come up with their approaches, and that, I think, is the way to handle it. I wouldn't try and come up with some special children's adventure or tailor it that way.
This is my line of thought, too. I haven't gamed a lot with kids, but I don't know. I'm a little put off by some of these, role-playing games that are written for children. They're like kids role-playing games. I'm skeptical of that. I really am. I think kids can handle things.
I know. And I looked at a couple as well, and I was just reading it thinking, well, this has nice cartoony illustrations, but it's still all about killing. So what's up with that? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be mindful of content, I guess, with kids. That's one consideration. I probably wouldn't want to play Morkborg or Lamentations.
No, and I mean, I did do Thousand Islands with my son, and there's some stuff I gently elided.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I do think, though, that kids, especially slightly older kids, they can handle adult role-playing game things pretty well. I did when I was that age, and I'm sure the kids in your life can too. And also, if they're a little north of grade school age, they're probably going to have heard of D&D anyway, and they're not going to want to play your kiddie shit. They're going to play D&D. So just be aware of that. Last thing, when considering your table, do you have a group of people, or maybe even just one or two people, with very poor attention spans? I don't even know if you give this person the gift of gaming, Tom. For your own sanity. Maybe you don't.
Yeah, maybe not.
It's definitely an important consideration. When you're thinking about all of our previous comments this episode, just ramp it up. It intensifies all the problems. Best advice, aim for a very short session.
I don't know what I would even do in that case. It has to be someone who can at least sit through a movie without asking you questions.
Yeah.
I think that's the personality type you're after, right?
Listeners, in that case, give yourself the gift of not running a role-playing game for these people. So every time I think of the short attention span gamer, I imagine what would it be like to run a role-playing game for the Bluth family from Arrested Development. Right? And it's no, it sounds like hell, or it sounds like the best thing ever. I can't decide. Well, That's my talk today. Tom, anything else you want to add?
No, I think you've covered it all pretty well. Yeah, there is that sort of side issue of the remote gift of gaming where you're just buying random stuff for people. That might be the safe one if you're not sure about the attention span. Just get them a book that you think they'll like and let them do their own thing with it and don't worry about it.
Indeed. Let's go to the next segment. Okay, for this segment, we are talking about our New Year's gaming resolutions for 2021. Tom and I are going to talk about ours for a minute, and then we're going to read some from listeners, some listener-submitted resolutions, and maybe comment on them as well. Tom, what are your gaming resolutions for next year?
Yeah, well, they're sort of two related ones, I guess. My resolutions are based on the idea of digging more things out of the back catalogue. So my first one is just, I had a good time coming into 2020 and just contained entirely within the year of playing The Enemy Within for Warhammer, as we've discussed at some length and one more episode to go on this podcast. And then a Tribe 8, a game I'd bought in 1999 and at the time had no idea what to do with. And then when I sort of looked at the books again 20-something years later, went, oh yeah, I get it now. And so I ran a month or two long campaign with it and it was really great. So I've got a few more things on the shelf. It's not like doing a bucket list. It's just things I never really used. And I feel like I'm going to do that. So I've got the old Cyberpunk 2020 box set, Land of the Free. I think 2021 is the best year for irony to be playing Cyberpunk 2020. So that's what I want to do. And maybe, and things like campaigns and source books, things that, similar to Tribe 8, I would say. Things where when I got them, I was like, this is cool, but I don't know how to handle it. I think there's probably a few books on my shelf that I will be able to handle now or have a good solid idea what to do with. So that's what I want to do on that one. And then related is all about me, which is to get back into playing my own projects, which is to say not just playtesting them, but especially this last year I've been doing a lot of translating things and not working on my own stuff as much.
Yeah.
So what I do like to do though is to let projects lie fallow for a bit. I'll work on them for a while and then I sort of put them in storage and come back to them later. So I've got things like Revolution, as mentioned earlier, that OSR Cops game that you were in a playtest of, which I now think I've fixed most of the problems with.
There was a really cool core idea in that game buried in a lot of overhang, basically.
Yeah. And I think I've chipped away the marble to find the statue of a bent detective inside. So, but the thing is, I don't really want to quote unquote playtest them. I think I just want to play them with my groups. Yes. And that will be fun, right?
I 100% understand what you're talking about. This distinction between playtesting and just sort of playing your own games. Like there is a real difference. And it's different from playtesting because I feel like playtesting is very targeted, right? Playtesting is like, I'm going to playtest this particular rule or this particular setup or this particular procedure and see how it goes. And I'm going to get feedback from you. No, when I'm playing it just to play it, I'm not soliciting feedback at all from the players. It's just my own observations. It's just my own feeling, my own sense of things. And you just get this sort of attachment to the game. It's the same with Brentwood Bay. I mean, I did purposely play test it in the beginning. I needed to make sure that certain things worked. But then I just started playing it. And that led to further, I would even say deeper insights into what the game does that I wasn't even aware of when I was writing it. And so, I'm with you on that a lot, Tom.
Yeah,
I think there's something really special going on there when you kind of spend time with your own stuff in that way it's meant to be used.
Yeah, I hope so. Anyway, but that's all I've got really. I probably will have better resolutions if I think about this more up until January the 1st. But anyway, what are yours?
Mine are, I want to start a Trophy Gold campaign in order to support this show. A couple of years ago when we first started this show, what was that?
No, I'm just thinking about how basically when I was just trapped in The Enemy Within, I wasn't generating any useful content for the podcast because I was just playing one thing all the time.
My well is running dry, so I need to get back in there if we're going to keep having this show. When we first started Fear of the Black Dragon, I had this really great World of Dungeons campaign going where basically I would just get new players in every couple weeks and we'd try out a new module, and I was able to crank out a lot of modules. That was and I built up this archive of wow, I've played a lot of stuff, I've kind of not done that in recent years. It's been a little bit more spotty. And so I want to do a very intentional campaign focused on supporting this show. And so that's a major resolution for me. And the other one is I just want to finish up a couple projects that I've been working on forever. I need to get them done. 2 of the games I've been working on. One is The Between, and the other is Pizza Time. I need to get those finished. I'd love to have them both out by I'm aiming to have The Between out by late January, and Pizza Time maybe a little bit after that.
Oh man, don't give delivery dates. You'll live to regret it.
Yeah, I know. That's okay though.
Yeah,
but I don't owe anybody anything though.
That's true.
I could just say whatever I want and then go back on it.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are my 2 big resolutions.
Let's look at the listener submissions.
Yeah. This is one that I found really intriguing from Sean Smith. Sean says, I'm enjoying the FKR trend and hope to run more games in that style. I had to ask Sean what this was because a Google of FKR failed me completely.
No, it turns out I was aware of this trend but didn't know it had a name. So
yes. Do you want to kind of give the listeners a sort of capsule pitch of this here?
I'm assuming the R is for either Renaissance or whatever the R in OSR is supposed to stand for. But Free Kriegspiel is one of, it's like the antediluvian ancestor of wargaming and role-playing games, where Prussian military officers would do these strategic wargaming in military colleges, right? So you have an umpire who decides the effects of the orders you're giving to your armies and so on. And then in the miniatures gaming variant of that, it's kind of similar. It tends to be quite a lot of players, and sometimes it's commanding regiments on Napoleonic battlefields. Other times it's medieval peasants brawling in a town. And usually it's maybe up to 8 or 9 players and a team of umpires or one guy who just adjudicates things. And there'll be a simple core system usually of who wins a certain contest or succeeds at a certain thing. But generally it's up to the umpire to be this kind of, just to sort of have a coherent view of how the world works. So that if, for example, you try and take a wagon train across a river when the rainwater has caused a flood, they decide how many of your packages get loose and fall over the waterfall, that kind of thing.
Yeah. My understanding of it is that it's, in a role-playing game context at least, it's extreme GM fiat, basically.
I mean, yeah, pretty much.
Which doesn't sound like the most attractive way of putting it, but I would like to know more. Sean's resolution here makes me want to understand this better. So maybe that's my side resolution as well, is to see what is going on here. Nice. Because I think it probably, my inroads into the hobby and my sort of vectors that I interact with most often are going to have missed this. I didn't even know what it meant. So I'm interested to see what it means as well. Sean also mentions that he wants to release some zine versions of his OSR titles, Guilty Toads and Ouroboros. From Gus L. Gus sent us lots of resolutions.
It's quite long, this one.
Yes, I know. Good luck sticking to all this, Gus. My 2021 plans are to run more games. It kind of goes on a bit there. Also, he intends to get a few things published, a rule set aimed at exploration and dungeon crawl play based on OD&D, and what he thinks of as the 2012 Toronto old school scene rules. I love the specificity here.
I think I've seen some of his sample layouts for this. It looks amazing and very easy to understand and read as well.
Yeah, I mostly just love a friend of the show, Ramadan S.
Yeah, that's him, right? He is the 2012 Toronto old school, isn't he?
Right, yeah. He refers to the Toronto OSR scene as Toronto SR.
Right.
Which I hated at first, but I've kind of grown used to it. Gus also says he's got some introductory adventures he wants to get published. Tomb Robbers of the Crystal Frontier, which is a low Western-influenced opium fantasy about looting the crashed crystal fortresses / tombs of space elves. Several other things. Companion Zine Adventure to Ultan's Door #3 is coming out, so that's pretty cool. We covered the first of those modules on this very show, or the first of the zines anyway, and some other things. I like this. Gus says he needs to do a good, complete read of Apocalypse World and Night Witches to get a better understanding of the play style. Good luck, Gus. It's probably not going to happen.
I don't think
that's your goal.
I would just try playing it.
I would just play it.
Yeah.
If your goal is to learn PBTA by reading Apocalypse World, you will fail. It is not going to happen.
I'll be honest, I think I must be in the 1% of people who read Apocalypse World and was like, oh yeah, that's cool, I get it.
I did not get it at all. I had to learn PBTA not even just through Dungeon World, but through specifically this little 10-page guide called How to Play Dungeon World.
Wow.
that was what taught me PBTA. I would recommend that, Gus. Go check that out.
Yeah, that intro guide, that's pretty good, yeah.
You want to read some of the next ones?
Yeah, I'll do one. From our good friend Horst Wurst, he has Get to the Black City, with my open table UVG campaign on the Gauntlet. So I like this one because Horst was in the game I ran of UVG, which is pretty nice. And we didn't get anywhere near the Black City, so fingers crossed. Sorry, to give some context, UVG is about traveling from east to west along a kind of Silk Road style caravan trade route, and the Black City is the far, far distant terminus of that weird fantasy road. He also wants to organise a multiple GMs open table Delta Green group, also on the Gauntlet. That sounds excellent, if a bit of a headache.
It does sound like a lot of work.
There's a Discord you could... Because actually Delta Green is organised in a cell structure, so you could do that for your multi-GMs. White Whale finally run a medium-length Veins of the Earth campaign. And finally getting back to playing around an actual table with food and friends and smells and sounds that don't come out of the speakers of a stupid laptop. I just realised I've misstressed that, so it sounds like his laptop also makes smells, but you get the idea.
I'm kind of with you on that one as well, Horst.
Yeah.
My tiny bubble, fortunately, is all gamers, so we actually do manage to get some games played around the table, but
yeah.
I would like more, though.
Yeah, I'd like to just there's a quick one in here from MTBDM. Oh, my eyesight's going, I think that's what it says. It's quite simple, but I think we can sympathise. I chronically over-prepare. I want to prepare closer to the amount of material my specific group will appreciate. Words to live by, yes.
Yes, indeed. I actually don't do this anymore. I think something that you do, when we talk about your skill set as a GM, the more you GM things, this is actually one of the things that gets easier. This is one of the things that gets better. I've gotten really good at knowing exactly how much I can get done in the amount of time I have. Like when I ran this Christmas thing yesterday, I knew, all right, I need to cut this and cut this and cut this in order to make this work. And it was perfect. So yeah, you actually do get better at that, but over-preparing can be a thing for sure.
Yeah.
Listener Nicholas just says quite simply he wants to play more. He played a recent game with the Gauntlet. Lots of love for the Gauntlet today. And that helped him unlock some fear he'd been having, or at least get rid of it, I assume. He also has targeted my game, Brindlewood Bay, as a campaign he'd like to do. I highly recommend it. Please do that. And he wants to play more without being a GM or facilitator. That's a great resolution for a lot of people out there, I think. And let's see, from Ben. Ben says, gaming in my second language is always a pleasure, but a challenge. I aim to connect with more people through gaming in Japanese this year. I look forward to watching lots of historical dramas to get the right words right when role-playing. That seems
good.
very admirable.
I was invited to join a French game this year that then didn't happen, so maybe I'll get my chance to play the low vocabulary barbarian who only uses the two form of all verbs. Yeah.
Nice.
From Alexi, who says, I want to play some bucket list games I somehow haven't yet. He gives the examples of Dialect and Root, and to play more of my own games run by other people. Oh, that's a good one, actually.
That's a good one, yeah.
Oh, and a quick plug for Alexi, though. Hang on. He says, plus I would love to have an established indie publisher put out one of my bigger games, like Checkpoint Midnight or Plutonian Shore. So if any of those megabucks indie publishers out there are listening.
Yes, indeed.
Do we have any more in here? I don't think so.
I don't think so. I think that's it.
Cool.
So let's go to our last little segment. We're reviving part of the format here with companion adventures. Listeners.
Kind of.
Kind of. Yeah, not really. It's a companion to Christmas, Tom. That's.
I mean, history will be the judge of whether this segment's going to work. Okay, let's crack on.
We're going to make some recommendations for non-traditional or somewhat offbeat or obscure holiday companion adventure offerings. Tom, what do you have for us?
Okay, so a slightly snarky recommendation for the mystery gamer, which is a couple of stories by Agatha Christie, Hercule Poirot's Christmas, and The Adventure of the Christmas Pudding. Specifically, I recommend reading the Wikipedia page for each of these, so you just find out what happens in the mystery, and you don't have to read Agatha Christie's prose, which is awful.
Wow. Sick burn on Agatha Christie, Jesus.
Take that, Christie.
Very good.
Okay, how about you?
Mine are all movies, so if we're going to dive into movies, let's just do it.
Okay.
Movies and TV shows. I'm going to recommend Smoky Mountain Christmas, both the 1986 film and, if you're able to, the real-life experience of spending Christmas in the Great Smoky Mountains. The movie is one of a number of Dolly Parton Christmas movies. It is so cheesy, it's probably awful, but I love it. I have like a huge, deep, let's say, well of affection for all things Dolly Parton, and in particular this movie. I love this little summary of it on IMDb or something, which goes, a country singer rescues 7 orphans from a sheriff and a witch.
I have to see this film.
Yeah, I think you do. It's an easy watch. It goes down super easy. Anyway, the thing I love about Dolly Parton Christmas movies, because there's like a million of them, the thing I love about them is everyone in the movie is clearly meant to make Dolly Parton look great. Right. So, like, the 7 orphans in this movie are fucking disgusting. They're so grubby and they're so filthy, and they are like, and the whole the trappings are beautiful because it's the Great Smoky Mountains, but it's clearly like impoverished. But Dolly Parton looks like $1 million. She looks like an angel. She like practically glows on the screen. So there is a certain camp wonderfulness to this movie. Also, I love to spend Christmas in the Great Smoky Mountains. It is one of my favorite places to be during the holidays, and I highly recommend it. I mean, it's a little cheesy to say, oh, go to Dollywood, for Christmas. That is a kind of a cheesy thing to do, but it's also a super heartwarming, super... like, it's just the full-on, like, Christmas experience, right? Like, if you want the Christmas experience, spending it in the Great Smoky Mountains, particularly around Pigeon Forge and Dollywood, it's like being in another world. It's so great. I highly recommend it.
Okay, so I have a TV episode. Well, it's a longer one, and that is A Christmassy Ted. Now, this is by no means an unusual recommendation for Ireland or the UK, where it's on TV every year. But yeah, this is the Christmas special episode of Father Ted, featuring a sort of action movie parody sequence in the largest lingerie department in Ireland. Also, the Golden Cleric Awards, a mysterious stranger who claims to have gone to seminary with Ted, and various subplots such as the Tea Master 1000 and so on. Honestly, if you watch this and you can't get 3 sessions of role-playing game ideas out of it, I don't know how to help you any further. Especially, I think, because it has all these good things that can go wrong. And now they're obviously they're all comical, but in any role-playing game, I think they're quite good ideas. Like, because you weren't at the house, they sent Father Dougal to do the funeral, and that's why the hearse is on fire when we cut over to the churchyard. Like, this idea of, because you weren't there, someone else had to do it instead, and they're an idiot. This is all good GM hard move fodder, so to speak.
Your recommendations are all connected to, they're supposed to be advice for gamers and gaming, and mine is just, Christmas stuff I like.
I mean...
So, maybe we weren't on the same page with this. This last minute segment.
we have done very little prep for this.
This is true. It's fair. I'm going to go with my last 2 recommendations are both kind of gentle Christmas horror movies, listeners. I love Rare Exports, the 2010 Finnish film. It's kind of scary, but it's more of a Kids on Bikes level of scary. But basically, I don't want to give away any spoilers because it has some good twists, but essentially it's this kid in remote Finland, which I think is maybe all of Finland, I don't know, but very rural Finland.
Massive burn on Helsinki there.
Sorry, I forgot about Helsinki. It's in rural Finland, and basically it's the secret history of Santa Claus. It's pretty great. It's good fun. And also, the other day I watched Gremlins, the classic movie from 1984, and Jesus Christ, that movie holds up great. It is still so good. I thought it was going to be oh, this is just nostalgia that made me like this movie or whatever. No, Gremlins is still amazing. It's still so funny and so enjoyable. Go watch Gremlins. Tom, finish this off, please, mercifully.
My last recommendation is a poem by T.S. Eliot, probably a man who doesn't need recommending, although his reputation after that whole Cats movie this year maybe needs a bit of salvaging. And that's simply the Christmas-themed poem, Journey of the Magi. If you look around on the internet, you can even find, there's a recording of him reading it. Yeah, T.S. Eliot, Journey of the Magi. It's a poem.
Fabulous. Listeners, that is the 2020 Very Merry Black Dragon Christmas Special. This is a production of The Gauntlet. Tom is just rolling his eyes at me. This is a production of The Gauntlet. The Gauntlet can be found on Twitter at GauntletRPG. We have a website. It's gauntlet-rpg.com if you'd like to support this show. Hopefully after this you
I'm not sure they're going to want to now.
It's at patreon.com/gauntlet. Tom, thank you for this. And also thank you for a wonderful year of Fear of the Black Dragon recording sessions.
Same to you, Jason. Thank you very much. And thank you, of course, to our seasonal editing elf, Rich Rogers.
Fabulous.
Bye, listeners.
Merry Christmas, listeners. Happy holidays.
Ho, ho, ho!
Hi listeners, Jason from Gauntlet Publishing here. I want to tell you about a couple of new things we have for you this month. The first is Nephews and Peril, a major expansion for Brindlewood Bay, the game of cozy murder mysteries and supernatural horror. Nephews and Peril is a collection of 6 new mysteries for the game, each by a different fabulous author, and some revised rules and gameplay advice. It can be found in the $6 plus Gauntlet Patreon feed until October 15th, and then Drive-Thru RPG after that. The next thing I want to tell you about is Codex Home, the first issue in Volume 5 of the magazine. Codex Home features new material for Trophy Gold in Brindlewood Bay, plus the all-new game Back Again from the Broken Land, which is about fantasy heroes recounting stories as they return home from a calamitous war against a Dark Lord, all while evading the remnants of that Dark Lord's army. It's a fantastic Powered by the Apocalypse game, and we're delighted to share it with you later in October. Remember, your contributions to the Gauntlet Patreon help support everything we do in the community, including this very podcast. As always, thanks so much for your support.